Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sophie Bacq. I'm an associate professor of entrepreneurship at the Kelley School, and welcome to this Kelley webinar. I'm here with Sankalp Mohan Sharma, who's our guest for today, and we're so delighted to be here and to be speaking about social entrepreneurship. Before we get started, I want to send our thanks to IU Ventures, who is hosting us here in the Dimension Mill in Bloomington, Indiana, as well as to the Kelley Institute for International Business for organizing this event. I'm even more excited that you and I, Sankalp, communicated by email and a few times on Teams and Zoom in preparation of this event, but we've never had a chance to meet in person.
This is the first time I'm seeing you.
Exactly. So this is exciting, and I want to say hi to and welcome to all of you who are joining us online, live, or later at some point as you watch this webinar. And we've interacted, if I remember correctly, I think it was last spring.
Correct.
Over the People of IU, the social media campaign that you created,
yes, ma'am.
To build more connections, as I understood, which was so critically important during COVID, and showcase diversity on the Bloomington IU campus.
Yes, ma'am.
I've also heard from you about all of your efforts to address the societal issues that surround us.
Right.
I've watched your TED Talk,
so
I'm going to do a little advertising here for our friend Sankalp. So TED Talk that's titled The Hunger to Change. So I hope that you're all putting aside 30 minutes to actually watch this TED Talk as soon as we're done, or later this week or this month.
Yes, ma'am.
It's really impressive to hear your story.
Thank you so much.
On such a prestigious platform, and even more prestigious here to hear more about your learnings and reflect on social entrepreneurship. So based on that, you work at the Satch Foundation that we'll talk about.
Correct.
I think you're a social entrepreneur.
Yes, ma'am.
I really think so. Do you agree with me? And if so, why? And if not, why?
That's
We'll stop the webinar.
No, I agree with that. I feel like I have been a social entrepreneur for a little bit now. More so in a formal capacity when I founded the Satch Foundation, where we're working across countries, across borders for the society, and to really help uplift a lot of the less populated parts, the slums and different parts of the world, the underdeveloped countries. I definitely agree that, I would consider myself a social entrepreneur where I'm doing good through the organization that I'm running for the society.
Okay. Yeah. So, would you agree that through your role as a social entrepreneur, we'll dive more deeper into the Satch Foundation in a little bit. You're combining like the principles of entrepreneurship that we can understand as being innovation, risk-taking, this willingness to change the status quo, to disrupt systems, and you explained that very well and very convincingly in your TED Talk.
Appreciate it.
With the intention to do good and to improve the well-being of others and to improve our planet and our natural environment. So that makes sense. But I have, I'm wondering how do we get there at such a young age? Don't have to disclose your age, but you're a current Kelley undergraduate student.
Yes, ma'am.
And you have such a outstanding record already. And so one story I hope I don't deform it too much, the story that you talk about in your TED Talk, where you felt a need for a change. So you had been given the opportunity by your dad to take charge of meeting monthly with the newspaper men. A newspaper man, if I understood correctly, and you can correct me if I didn't get it correctly. A newspaper man comes monthly to Indian homes to collect used newspapers, maybe old books, against a fee. So basically purchasing those books and newspapers in order to create some value with that. I don't know what to do with that. And so you were in charge, and your dad said, well, you can be in charge of that job for the family. And can you tell the story about how you changed that habit? You thought, that's not a good system. I don't see why this person would pay me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whereas I see this person might need more than I do.
Exactly. So in India, we have the system of a kabadi wala. So a kabadi wala is someone that basically is like a rag picker, almost comes to your house, like you said, monthly or bi-weekly, and will pick up all of your older newspapers, books, take them by weight, and pay you a certain cost for it. And then, gives that to his boss for recycling and maybe makes a very, very, very small income out of it. So exactly as you said, my father basically gave me the opportunity to lead this task for the family and said, in return, whatever few dollars or few rupees back home in India that you make, you get to keep and do whatever you want. And so I speak about this in my TED talk. I say that this was like a golden opportunity for me to have my favorite ice cream every month, where I was earning my own money to have my own treats. And one of those summer afternoons, as I was enjoying that ice cream, I saw the kabadi wala, the newspaper man, on his cycle. Summer afternoons in India are really, really warm. So he's got two huge rag bags on either side of the cycle. He has one of his sons in front, one in the back, and he's pedaling away and sweating and exhausted in the middle of the day, probably how I would be probably by the end of the day on a very tough day. And so I saw that, and my ice creams weren't the same anymore. They lost the flavor. They weren't as enjoyable. I just felt like it felt wrong to be taking money, like you said, from someone that comes from a not so secure, financially secure background. And so I went back home and I said, I called my father Papa. So I said, hey, Pao, is it all right if I just not keep the money and give him everything back? And my dad said, if that's what you want to do, go ahead and do it. And so I would go back, give him all of the newspapers, all of the books, told him to keep the money. And he was confused, but he was really grateful. So he would take all the things, come monthly and, take all of my older things I wasn't using and just take them by weight. No questions asked. A few months into the practice, my neighbors, my friends found out, they started doing the same thing. And so he made double the money, basically. He wasn't charging us or wasn't paying us and was also making what he got from his boss or whatever. And so about a year into the practice, the kabadi wala came in again on a Sunday morning, knocked at my door. I ran to the door, saw him there, ran back in to check if I had old newspapers, and I didn't that night. So I went out and I told him no newspapers today because we didn't communicate through words, only through actions. And he said, no, and tried to communicate something, and I had no idea what he was saying because we didn't speak the same language. And all of a sudden, he falls down on his knees and starts sobbing. And I'm thinking, why is someone coming to my house Sunday morning and sobbing at my doorstep? And so the obvious natural reaction, I sit down with him, pat his back, try to understand the situation. But long story short, he goes into his rag bag, takes out 2 cards and hands them to me. I look at them and they were the report cards or, the transcripts of both of his children. And with the practice that me and my neighbors had adopted, we were able to help educate 2 young children in India. And that sort of was the big light bulb moment for me. That was where I realized if we as youngsters questioned everything that's happening around us and really understood and asked the question why behind every single practice, we can really create a lasting impact by making small changes. And so as probably a 12 or 13-year-old, I was able to help sponsor 2 children's education. And that was probably my biggest life accomplishment so far.
That's amazing. That you say also biggest and youngest, right?
Yes,
you said
ma'am.
12, 13 years old. And you use three kind of verbs as call to action that really resonated with me at the end of the talk, where you mentioned believe, empower, and act. And since then, a couple of years later, we're here in Bloomington, Indiana, having this enjoyable conversation.
Yes, ma'am.
What are some of the other actions that you took? Like, can you tell us, like, from that moment, which you explain on in the TED Talk, but then we're fast forward a couple of years and we hear, like, what happened? How come did you come to the U.S.? And how did that experience, like this direct experience with somebody who was in need and your realization that you had agency, you could make decisions to change the system, the way things were done, at least at this very local one family level.
Right.
From that moment, what other actions did you take? And I know there are many. I've looked at your CV, but do you want to take a few as examples to really explain to the audience, as a social entrepreneur, what other efforts have you been involved?
That's a great question. So again, like you said, there's a bunch of stuff, but I'll touch on some of my personal favorite ones. And again, I'm going to be leaving some of them out, but I'll talk on some of them. after that amazing day of my life, I decided that, you know what, I have had experience in working as an intern or as a volunteer with a lot of non-profit organizations, the government of India at one point. What is something that I can do myself? Can I create a place, a platform where young people like myself who are passionate about creating change, no matter in what aspect, planet, human beings, animals, water, any aspect, can I create something that gives everyone an opportunity to implement their own ideas and not be working with another company and implementing someone else's ideas? And so that's when I founded the Such Foundation back home in India in 2017, with the idea to work on the 17 sustainable development goals by the United Nations. And through that organization, we connect young people around the world. We are now about 4 years old. We're in close to 11 countries now, thousands of young people working with us. And we try to connect a lot of young people where we learn from one another and then create an impact in our own societies and localities. So to give you an example, one of the months we worked on, let's say, a cleaning drive. So in Bangalore, all of my interns back home in Bangalore, we would all gather. We would go to one of our favorite hills, which is a favorite picnic spot in Bangalore. And we cleaned the entire hill and collected tons and tons of trash and sent that for recycling. That was a small effort that we could create, putting in signs there to not pollute, things like that. So doing that, creating educational drives to provide education about menstrual hygiene in slums, which is not very popular, which is not spoken about, is a big taboo topic. Talking about topics like that and actually providing the education that is needed. We did tons of those campaigns, clothing donation drives. So coming to the US, one of the things that I noticed was that the level of poverty is very different. So there is a level of poverty even within America, but the level of poverty that you would see in an underdeveloped or a developing country is beyond belief. To be able to think that someone on the street has gone 10 days without eating a single meal, or someone on the street passed away because they didn't have clean drinking water, is almost scary to me. And so that's why I created the Such Foundation, where young people like myself will come up with innovative ideas by questioning everything that is around us. As we grow older, we look at these chairs and we're like, that's where you sit. This is a table. This is where you would keep your glass. But why would you sit on a chair and not on a table? Why does the glass go on the table? These are the little questions that are considered very silly when you're a child, but these are the questions that children ask, and therefore, with their open mind, are able to create, a very unique, innovative solution to the problems that are around the world. And so with that mindset, we started off the foundation, and it's going really, really well, and we're trying to create a lot of impact in smaller societies and localities around the world. So a lot of that has been happening for a few years now, and it's been a rewarding journey.
That's fascinating. There are many things, many thoughts that spurred to mind as you were talking. So a few of them, I love how you managed to connect the global level United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Correct. That I touched on my course in social entrepreneurship, that many social entrepreneurship educators touch on as an anchorage point to kind of frame what kind of problems affect society at large these days, with a horizon of 2030. Yeah. So we have nine more years to kind of do the work collectively. So you connect these global issues with some kind of a local implementation. But doing some of my research on the Such, what's the Such Foundation, by the way? What does it mean?
So the Such Foundation, the name, I can tell you, has a really unique story. There's two reasons to the name. The first is that the Such word is an Indian word, and it means truth back home in India. And so through the foundation, the reason I named it Truth is because we're trying to highlight simple truths that everyone knows but chooses to ignore. You cut down trees to build buildings, at one point we will run out of oxygen. So highlighting those truths through the work that we do. And then secondly, I come from a family of huge supportive parents. Like, I talk about this all the time. If it wasn't for my parents and my sister and the upbringing that I have had, I wouldn't be even 1/4 the person that I am today. And so I knew that when I start my first organization, I want to name it after my parents. And so my father's name is Sandeep, so S-A, and my mom's name is Chavi, C-double-H. So I put that together and used the word truth to name the company. Yes, ma'am. Yes,
well, that was worth the digression. I really wanted to, what Such meant. So I love the double meaning. Thanks for sharing that with
Absolutely.
us. So doing my research on the website and all of the great resources that are available, again, very impressive, a 4-year-old or a foundation.
Yes, ma'am.
So connecting these global issues with the local implementations, but also the worldwide scope of the foundation, Bloom Online, in the sense that you're connecting youth, young leaders around the world to work on these different issues, such that if a person doesn't feel that she has enough of the tools or capabilities, and that's my interpretation, you can connect. You serve as you're really a people connector, aren't you?
Exactly.
Isn't that what's on top of your CV? That could
I couldn't say it better than you did. I couldn't. I mean, that's exactly what the foundation does. We've noticed that let me move back a little bit. So I started the foundation, and I'm under the impression that I'm the only young person in the world that creates about creating a change. And a few years later, I'm at the United Nations for something called the Youth Assembly. Just that. And I meet a lot of these young people around the world that are doing so much, more than I could ever imagine. And I said, wait, there are more people that are as interested as I am at creating change on different aspects at a younger level. That sort of inspired me. And that's when I said, how can we connect all of them to work together? So for example, if you're a young change maker in Nigeria, and I'm a young change maker in India, and you work on climate change and I work on quality education, we would dedicate one entire month to you, come up with an easy project that is easy to implement but has a lasting impact, and you would then have the ability to take your project that you would have done individually in your society, you come to the Such Foundation and you're able to implement that in all of the countries where our organizations are present. So you have the opportunity to take a local project to a global scale as a young person. And that's exactly where the Such Foundation comes in. It's in connecting and providing those resources that, a lot of times young people might find that not having for themselves. So that's exactly that.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. So it can be both, like you don't feel you're resourceful enough, or you think you're the only one. And so instead of reinventing the wheel, you can learn from others who've also researched that kind of issue in other parts of the globe.
Exactly.
So the local-global connection is very fascinating to me, especially as social means human. It's in psychology, you hear a lot about pro-social intention, pro-social behaviors, trying to do good for others. But the other notion of the word social that really precedes the entrepreneurship, in the social entrepreneurship phrase, is social as being connected to one another. And so there's a lot of rhetoric these days on collective action. And so it's very thrilling to see that your foundation is doing exactly that.
No, I appreciate that. And that's exactly the thing. The only way you can create global impact is by starting locally. And that's sort of like the motto of the organization, creating a global impact by impacting the local communities around the world.
That's great. Well, I want to come back to impact in a few seconds. The second thing I wanted to highlight for those who are attending the webinar is this focus on questioning the status quo. That reminds me of an excellent book by Burgers, The Power of Inquiry, that really highlights the power of asking questions, like more than answers that are available in any kind of web browser these days. I mean, most answers, let's say. It seems like for anyone, the power that we have as a human species is really in asking good and the right questions. And it's not an easy thing to do, but I think it's really great that you're emphasizing that skill in the youth that you're leading and inspiring through a foundation. And the third point I wanted to make is about the youth, right? You're focused on the youth, you're a young man, so that makes a lot of sense. But also knowing that the millennials and later generations are making up at least 50% of the global workforce, I think, these days. What are your thoughts, like having collaborated with a lot of them, what are your thoughts on the youth views on the role of organizations in addressing these sustainable development goals, or, to make it more simple, the role of organizations, their organizations, or the organizations that they interact with as, interns, trainees, future employees, their parents' organizations, in addressing societal issues. What is the youth thinking? And that's a very general question, but if you can share some insights.
Absolutely. So again, this is something that I really, this is probably my favorite thing about the youth, is their ability to question. And that's exactly what you brought up. So I'll touch on both of those and sort of interlink both of them. One of the things that I've noticed is young people, so as we start growing older, we start accepting facts instead of understanding them. So, that's the thing about youngsters that I love so much. The fact that they have a free mind, which then leads to their ability to innovate. And so that's exactly what the youth is thinking about right now, in my opinion. They are looking at global challenges. They are looking at things the human race is facing as a whole, the planet is facing as a whole. But they're thinking of how to be more innovative with a solution. Because solutions have existed. People have spoken about, going back and planting a tree. But at the same time, we see 100 trees cut down. How can we be more and more innovative? That is something that the youth, I think, is really focusing on. And it is creating an impact. So in India, one of the plantation drives that we did is called a Miyawaki Forest. And this is based on the kinds of plants that are planted at a certain distance in a certain kind of soil in a very particular temperature. Why Miyawaki forests are, in my opinion, the future is that in 10 years' time of planting these forests or plants, you're able to create an ecosystem that would be well over 50 years old just by using the science and the innovation. And that's where I think the youth comes in looking at the same issues that are age-old, faced by the world all the time, but how can we come up with an innovative solution that actually creates a lasting impact? I think that's where the youth's head is at right now.
And what do you think drives them? Like, do you think that's innate, or do you think they have a higher propensity to be attracted by solving, being a problem solver? Is that what you're
That's a good
saying,
question.
Indirectly?
No, yeah, exactly. I think that's a good question. The thing is, when you're young, these are your developing years. You're in a phase where you're asking questions, you're going to your parents, you're going to your teachers, trying to understand things, trying to make sense of the whole world. And at this time is when the youth are the most curious, or anybody is the most curious. So my biggest aim in life, literally, is to remain young, at least in mindset. To not become one of those older generation people that is accepting the fact that a chair is meant to sit, but is actually questioning it. I think that is where the youth's head is at. So because it's their developing stages, they're very prone to being very innovation focused, irrespective of what they're interested in. It's a sport like basketball, or creating global change, or being a part of a company. How can we be innovative in everything that we're doing is what I have seen in my time with a lot of young people. And I feel like that is why the Such Foundation was able to be so successful, or is able to be so successful. It's not because of me or the 5 people at the top or other people. It's because of all the young people creating an innovative impact is what I think is the key here.
I do think, I want to disagree. I think it's thanks to you empowering, this collective. Like,
you're always too kind to me.
So, but another way of asking the question is, why do you think they're like directing their preference for innovation as opposed to be happy with the status quo? Like, why do you think they're directing that innovation fire towards the sustainable development goals as opposed to coming up with the next technology that's going to make them rich?
That's a good question. I think, so coming from a underdeveloped, developing country like India, I can speak on the youth from there. And in my personal opinion, in what I have seen in the past, looking at people like Malala Yousafzai, why does she want to work on quality education? Because she was shot in the head as she was trying to enter a school by people in Pakistan who didn't believe that she deserved a quality education. I think it's situations like this, where either a certain marginalized group is being oppressed, a certain issue is really at its largest, which you will see in a lot of underdeveloped and developing countries. And it is that urge to, have basic things like education that then they don't have access to then create an innovative solution. I think it's simply a reason of not having that access or being limited in terms of whatever one can achieve is what's driving younger people, at least in the underdeveloped, developing part of the world, to really come out of that cycle of, not being innovative, not being able to be successful, and come out and really create an impact, if that makes sense.
Right, absolutely. So like this first-hand experience, or at least having, if not experienced directly, this lack of access or unequal access to some basic goods and services, seeing it firsthand, which makes a lot of sense in the developing countries. And a country like the US, there's still a lot of societal issues,
Right.
and even if we don't experience it,
Right.
thankfully,
Right.
very gratefully, not ourselves, like
Yeah.
we show empathy, and the research has indeed found that the ability to cognitively put yourself in the shoes of others as much as you can
Right.
drives this intent to engage in
Absolutely.
social entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. 100%.
So lasting impact.
Yeah.
You've said that phrase a couple of times. So
Impact.
how do you understand impact and how do you measure it? That's the golden question.
So I've been thinking about this question for a little bit, even from the time that I started Such. And I have a quick anecdote that I'll share here, which really resonates with the question and resonates with me as a social entrepreneur myself. So through the Such Foundation, like I said, one of the things that we wanted to do was provide menstrual education, the importance of menstrual hygiene. So we would go to the slums, young people, we've learned about menstrual hygiene in schools. We go to the slums and talk to women of all ages, young, middle-aged, older women, and we tell them that, you know what, this is menstrual hygiene. If during your menstrual cycle you are using a sanitary pad, it will prevent these kinds of diseases that can occur if you're not being hygienic. So we provided that education, we raised a lot of money, and we were able to donate tons of sanitary pads, in the thousands, to a lot of women down south in Bangalore. I took immense pride in that project. That was a project that I was so proud of, having accomplished. We worked really hard on it, lots of goals, lots of hindrances, but we were able to make it happen. Now, it's a great moment for me. My organization's really happy. Young people are really happy. Week after our big drive, I go back to the slum. And, I'm just like trying to understand, are the women actually enjoying it or actually learning about it? So I go back to the slum and I found out that the women in the slum were so poor that they decided to resell those sanitary pads instead of using them. And that's when I learned the importance of impact. Even though we created such an impactful campaign, our impact was basically zero, if you think about it from that aspect. That's when I learned that the need of the hour there was not sanitary pads, was the ability to build and create those sanitary pads. And so the next thing that we were working on is providing, stitching machines to all of these women so they can make a living by creating sustainable cloth-made sanitary pads that still provide the hygiene, but also gives them, a daily wage, which was much more important in the hierarchy of needs. And I think that's how you measure impact. Is it really impacting, or are you just doing it because it seems like the right thing to do?
Very good. So it almost seems to me that impacting becomes empowering.
Exactly.
Right? By enhancing the level of capabilities or the range of capabilities that these women or this particular population has access to.
Exactly.
Well, that's a very good example. Thanks for sharing that. I was wondering, just out of curiosity, are you familiar with the Akar innovations?
I'm not.
Okay.
Tell me about that. Tell me about that.
Well, they seem to have established a very similar model to the one that you just described in terms of not only providing the sanitary pads and the education, which oftentimes are critical to go hand in hand. It's not about just dumping, so to speak, or just dropping products and just we feel the need, we've made an impact. So you already did two great things, which are like providing the good and explaining the benefits of it.
Right.
But they went a step further, as you did, and I don't know their history, like when they started.
Right.
But I'll send you the link. They started a small factory that's producing these pads by hiring these women and providing sources of employment. So very similar.
That's
so I wondered, and that's the thing. Like there is enough room for many kinds of innovations, many local adaptations, and there is enough needs to be filled.
Exactly. And when we think about innovation, a lot of the times when people talk about innovation, they think about creating something radical. You have to create an amazing machine, or you have to create something cool. That's not what innovation is in my mind. One of the other things that I've seen in India is we have this amazing young guy. His name's Ankit Quatra. I talk about him a lot. Never met him in person. He created an organization called Feeding India. So you have tons of restaurants in India that have buffets, and food goes waste, because there's not enough people to eat them. So what Feeding India does is they take their own containers across the country, would go to weddings, events, hotels, restaurants, and collect all of the remaining food while it is still fresh, and donate that to the slums. So instead of coming up with a radical innovation, they simply became the link in the chain that was broken. And that was innovative. So when we talk about innovation solely to, the younger people, you don't have to create the next Apple iPhone or the MacBook. You just have to find a real problem and think of a simple solution that can actually create impact. And that's what I think innovation really is. That's exactly what we did with the Such Foundation as well, if you look at it from that, perspective.
Absolutely. So having an impact in a way is usually situated in a chain of causes and consequences. Correct. So you can also see your impact as being able to connect two dots that were not previously connected, transferring values or goods that are in existence but are like going to waste. So like it's value, there is no value creation. It's almost destruction of edible food. Exactly. So arguably destruction, transferring that value to those that may make use of it.
Exactly. So. And I had a question for you. So I know you teach a social entrepreneurship class at Kelley a lot. How, what are the kinds of interests that young people in the US now have in social entrepreneurship? Is this something that is a booming topic, or is this something that's not having a lot of interest? What's that like?
That's definitely a booming topic.
Okay.
I've been teaching, thanks for your question. Now we're going to go on for another hour. No, I'm kidding. We're not forgetting your questions. So please feed in the chat. We'll take your questions shortly here. So I've been teaching the topic of social entrepreneurship since 2012, trying to recount. And it's definitely booming. Okay. I have less of a wow, that's new factor now than I had in 2012. So I think it's become more prevalent in conversations. I think social media for that has helped.
Of course.
So I hear a lot of students that have come across the issues of plastic in the oceans, for instance, through some kinds of Facebook feeds or other, social media platforms, and they want to do something about it. So oftentimes it comes from awareness, either, from social media, from reading the news, from firsthand experience. So always have every year, especially in the undergraduate class that I teach, I also teach in the MBA program, the undergraduate class, every year for sure we'll have a team that wants to focus and address the issue of food waste from the dining halls.
Of course.
That's
always a big question.
And that's really a good example, kind of relating back to the earlier question, the first-hand experience. Like, we have a problem. Like, we see this going to waste. Like, shouldn't you go to the homeless people that we see on the streets in some parts of Bloomington? Right. So I think the interest is rising. I loved. This is the best topic to teach, right? It's just like it's inspiring for one. And let's take maybe one more question, then back to you. It's hopefully inspiring to make a change, to give agency to the youth that are in my classroom, to provide many examples. I use a lot of case studies when I teach, so provide many examples, and you're a brilliant live example here of what it takes to make an impact, and also kind of demystify it and empower the youth to convince them, or actually make the point that they can do it. It's feasible, and there are steps and there are frameworks, and there's a lot that we know about what works for social enterprises that we can teach. But also, I think a bigger question in a broader reflection of the role of organizations, both social enterprises, but then also corporations, small businesses in society. Like, what I try to instill in students is asking themselves, back to your value chain, where can I create value as an individual, right? So when I go back to my family, can I relate some examples that maybe will inspire others? That's value creation. If you're, indirectly. What kind of choices am I making when I purchase goods? Of course, within limits of budgets, but where am I investing my money when I purchase clothing? And we discuss, that's also another popular one, like sustainable fashion.
That's becoming really big now. It's popping off around the world.
Yes. And so trying to give the students key questions that they can ask themselves, like, as a decision maker, as a future employee, as a daily consumer, where do you spend your money and where do you want to spend your money and then your time and efforts in this society? And so how do you think, and or do you have examples of social enterprises maybe collaborating with bigger corporations? Like, what's the role of the traditional non-social corporations in this whole societal impact discussion that we're having?
That's a great question. And this is something that I do come across a lot. A lot of young people would reach out to me and say, hey, Sankalp, we want to create an impact. We want to work for the society, but we're not entrepreneurial.
Right.
We don't want to start our own organization. And so 2 key aspects that I think come in here. One is that there's already a lot of amazing people working on a lot of amazing aspects of the society, of sustainable development. Let's join their efforts. If there's a non-profit or if there's a foundation that's doing something really cool that you're inspired by, go ahead and join them, volunteer with them, work with them. Habitat for Humanity is a big one here that I know, a lot of youngsters love. So go ahead and do that. And on the other aspect with the corporates, this is something that's really big in, Southeast Asia and Asia, also in the US to a certain extent, is the CSR, the corporate social responsibility. A lot of these companies understand, either for the sake of their brand name or for the sake of actually creating an impact, that CSR almost becomes extremely important in how well their brand is recognized. Youngsters are now making the conscious decision, like you said, of working with companies or being consumers for the companies that want to do good. And that's become a growingly important topic. And I think it's that, again, within this value chain of corporates and non-profits, CSR is that linking chain that sort of connects the two, that can still create a lasting impact. And I think something that's really, really important, and this is something that I found through my own, reflection and through working with a lot of young people, is that for young people, it's really important to make things cool. I'll explain why. So cool. Why? Yeah, it's important to be cool. Why do we like a rapper? Why do we like an actor? Why do we like Leonardo DiCaprio? Because we consider him to be a version of cool. How can we make social entrepreneurship? How can we make working for the society cool? So that young people think, it's cool to do sustainable fashion. It's cool to wear that Adidas shoes that's made of, the waste that was found in the ocean. How can we make working for the society, working for our planet, and working for our race cool, so that young people want to join that? I know I digressed a little bit, but I think that's
I'll do that all the time. Don't apologize.
But yeah, I think that's really, really important as we move forward in doing good in the business world with young people.
But don't you think that the cool factor has been reached in some ways?
I agree. It really has, especially with sustainable fashion. That's why I think it's popping off, because people that enjoy fashion see the big fashion weeks that happen, look at celebrities. Now you see celebrities wearing sustainable clothing, and it's become the cool.
Right.
That's exactly what's happened. So I agree. It's happening a lot, and I think the more cooler we're able to make things, the more quicker we will be able to achieve sustainable development.
Yeah, and so the corporations with like the visibility that they have are able to move the needle a little bit in terms of dictating what's cool, what's not cool. It's cool to recycle waste material and transform it into clothing.
Right.
With that, though, I want to point out that there is a range of corporations, because CSR remains embedded in this paradigm of it's a corporation that for the most part has to be accountable to shareholders and really favor the profitability bottom line. But that being said, I don't know if you're aware, but there is a certification that has now evolved into a new legal form in 30 plus states of the United States, and other European countries, I don't know about India, have new legislations as well that do kind of certify, legitimize this socially cool factor by recognizing that, yes, they are for-profit, they're organized like traditional corporations, but they take the social that is cool seriously. And that's called the B corporations. Have you heard of them? The B Corp. And so I think that's a great website to go on and look at the list of certified B Corps that are in your country. So the certification is global.
Correct.
And as you make a shopping decision, you can actually do choose for B Corp as opposed to a traditional organization.
Exactly. No, I agree with that. I actually studied about B Corp in one of my Kelley classes, and I learned so much. And I think that is a really amazing organization that's doing legitimately amazing work, which will then help our buying decisions based on the companies that are certified by them. So great resource for everyone that wants to know about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. I have more questions, but if there are questions from the chat, or if you've been thinking about a question, please, type it in so that we can address it. So, and I'm cognizant of everybody's times as well. Do you've been speaking a lot about the youth, but I also think that all of us are young at heart and want to remain young. I know that's your goal. Yeah. But what are some of recommendations that you have to carry on and do good? Like what practically, I don't know how many students we have or youth we have, can students do if they want to get involved? Like they've maybe never heard of social entrepreneurship. Today was the first time. Or they've heard of it, they were not really sure. Hopefully we brought some visibility on the concept. Yeah. What are your recommendations? Like, what should they do?
Good question. I think the first and most important step for young, old, irrespective of age, the first thing that anyone or everyone should do is start with themselves. What can we do within our own room, within our own house, and within our own household? Start at an individual level. Are we recycling? Are we segregating? If not, let's not look at a street-wide or a neighborhood or a society-wide issue. Let's start with ourselves. How can I be more sustainable? How can I work on, reducing my waste? How can I work on being sustainable when I wear clothing? How can I be more sustainable by myself as an individual? And second is educate yourself. So, there's a lot of books here. Books are amazing. I will be very honest and candid. I do not read at all. I cannot read a book. The last book I read was The Diary of a Wimpy Kid. The last book I read before that was Archie's Comics. I'm not a big reader. Okay. But the way I learn is through TED Talks, through talks. I love listening to video-based content, podcasts on a drive everywhere. Find the way that you learn and try to utilize that way to really learn about the different aspects of sustainability. It doesn't always have to be the books. It doesn't always have to be a lecture in class. If something you're passionate about, just learn about it through a TED Talk. Listen to your favorite rapper make a rap song on it, but try to learn something about it. So start at an individual level and then learn more on how you can grow that to the next house next to you. And as you start working from, literally the bottom up, you won't even realize and you'll be working on the whole city. It'll be that quick. So I think starting at your own level and educating yourself the way you enjoy it is probably the two biggest things that young people can do before they create a huge impact around the world.
I love that. So start small before you think even of growing, and be the best version of yourself.
Exactly.
This is your quote from your TED Talk. Really important. And I think generally in life, if we focus on our capabilities and just try to be better versions of ourselves, if we all do that, that would make the world a pretty good place.
Exactly. So, that would make a ginormous impact around the world.
So I see we have a question here, so I'm going to read it. Regarding today's topic of business doing good, how might we better leverage social entrepreneurship ideas and values to create more good within the global business education space?
That's a great question.
What are your thoughts as a student? And you're super visionary, so I'm sure you have a few.
No, that's a great question. I think, so the question asks us about what we can do to do good within the business in like schools.
Yes, business education space. And maybe draw from the principles of social entrepreneurship.
That's a great question. I think one of the things that I've personally seen being a student in the Kelley School is join an organization that is creating an impact within your school. I think that is really, really big. I'm a part of something called Kelley Student Government, which is the student government of the business school within IU. And we work on creating an impact on different aspects. We have a diversity committee, environmental sustainability committee, student life committee. We work on the mental health for students. So you can start by doing good, like I said, for people in your own classroom, for people in your alma mater. So join organizations like that have a direct impact on everyone that's around you. I know another amazing organization by a friend of mine, it's called Men as Allies, where they are bringing out a lot of the different stories of sexual abuse, sexual misconduct, and how men can be allies to women or just any other marginalized group. I think joining those organizations and also including all of these important aspects of DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion, in the coursework will have a really lasting impact. So even within, I'm an I-Core student right now, I'm a junior, even with my I-Core classes, in my management section, we learn about DE&I. And that's already a part of doing good.
Absolutely.
Because there's students like me that have heard all about it, and there's students that are hearing about it for the first time. But everyone's learning. So I think incorporating it in the educational curriculum, but also having, an opportunity to create realistic impact by doing things in the real world through organizations would be a great balance of actually doing good within the business education, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And it appears to me that your principles are very, you really abide by them,
Yes,
right?
ma'am.
Start small, start local,
Yes, ma'am.
start in your local student organizations. DEI is indeed an issues that we work on, we're working on as faculty as well to make sure
Absolutely.
it's discussed in the classroom. The Kelley Institute for Social Impact is also, KISI is also an umbrella organization to several other student organizations in microfinance and other areas where you can have an impact if you're a student. And I would add to that, like making sure that there are discussions of impact in marketing courses and supply chain courses, right?
Yeah.
And so that hopefully slowly but surely impact is becoming as important as other important bottom lines of the organizations throughout the different functions of businesses.
Absolutely. I mean, Kelley also has this amazing thing that isn't, I mean, it is quite popular, but not a lot of students know about it. It's called Brave Spaces. That's another great place to, come and talk about a situation where you may have felt, that you felt unsafe, uncomfortable. This is a space where everyone shares and listens with an open mind, and has been really, really amazing. So for students from Kelley specifically that are listening to this, I think Brave Spaces is another great resource for them.
Great. Well, thanks. I hope you're taking notes. We have one more question, or? Okay. So with that in mind, I will just thank you so much for your time. I learned a lot, and it was just fascinating. And I know we didn't even cover everything that you've been up to, but keep up the good work. Look at the IU People of IU campaign that's on social media. You'll just meet amazing people of the IU community thanks to Sankalp, the people connector. I think that's what we remember from today. Thank you all for joining us in this Kelley webinar. Really enjoyed it. Thanks for joining me, and see you next time, maybe.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sankalp.